However, in planning how to meet this threat, they were immediately faced with the problem of Belgian neutrality. The Belgians were afraid of provoking Germany by being seen to align themselves with Britain and France. They were also worried that a close alliance with France would antagonize their Flemish population, who harbored strong anti-French sentiments. They therefore pursued a policy of strict neutrality. Allied troops were forbidden to enter Belgium unless the country was actually attacked. They were denied the chance of familiarizing themselves with the terrain, or even of learning the battle plans of the Belgian army. Eventually, the Allies developed the strategy known as the Deal Plan, or Plan D. Once the Germans attacked, the French 1st and 7th Armies and the BEF, the most mobile Allied forces, would advance into Belgium and occupy a line running from Antwerp to Namur along the Deal River. Here, they hoped to link up with the Belgian army. To their right, the French 9th Army would deploy along the River Meuse, from Namur to the French border. In March 1940, the modification known as the Breda variant was added. This required the French 7th Army on the left to proceed even further to Breda, so as to form a continuous Allied Dutch-Belgian front. South of this, the French 2nd Army Group was to man the Maginot Line. And in the center of the Allied position, a small covering force of 5 divisions would be stationed behind the Ardennes forest. Because the Ardennes was considered impassable, no anti-tank or anti-aircraft weapons were given to these troops. To the north, both Belgium and Holland had evolved their own independent strategies to counter a German invasion. Belgium's first line of defense ran along the Albert Canal. Its linchpin was the formidable Fort Ebony Mail, and there were fieldworks with machine gun posts every 500 to 800 yards. But the Belgians did not expect to be able to hold this line for long. They subsequently planned to fall back on a line from Antwerp to Namur, known as the KW line. The same line that the French would advance to as part of their Deal Plan. Since November 1939, they had been fortifying this sector, and by May of the following year had erected hundreds of pillboxes along it, a small percentage of which were earmarked for occupation by the French and British. The Dutch, too, had decided to defend only part of their country. This was the vital economic area located between the 3 large rivers of the Meuse, Waal, and Rhine. The Dutch army was to fight delaying actions on the Grebbe line, and would then withdraw and resort to the traditional tactics of deliberate flooding to impede the enemy. The Allies' prospects of repelling the German invasion would depend entirely on factors beyond their control. Firstly, the Belgians would have to delay the Germans long enough for the Allies to occupy the Deal line. Next, there would have to be perfect coordination between the various forces. This coordination would have to be worked out in the very heat of battle. Above all, the Germans would have to attack precisely where the Allied strategists expected they would. commander-in-chief of the German army was General Walter von Brochich. 58 years old, he was a decorated veteran of the First World War, an excellent linguist and student of world affairs. A highly intelligent officer, he was Hitler's personal choice to become commander-in-chief in 1938. However, he lacked the strength of character to stand up to Hitler. Like many of his colleagues, Brochich doubted the wisdom of launching a Western offensive. When he voiced these doubts to Hitler, he was so fiercely berated, he never again dared to question the Führer's directives. In November 1939, Brochich was presented with the first draft of the sickle-stroke plan. Its author was Lieutenant General Fritz Erich von Manstein, one of the keenest operational minds in the German army. Brochich thought sickle-stroke unfeasible and dismissed it. But Manstein kept lobbying for its acceptance until at last Brochich lost patience and transferred him to a command in the east. Soon afterwards, in February, Manstein met Hitler and described his plan to him. The very next day, Brochich was ordered to adopt sickle-stroke, which the Führer presented as his own idea. Over the following weeks, as he oversaw the rehearsals for sickle-stroke, Brochich himself came to appreciate its potential. His troops had also benefited from months of training and reorganizing. Despite his cautious nature, Brochich felt the army at last had a real chance of victory. The supreme commander of the Allied forces in France was General Maurice Gamelin. He was aloof and felt ill at ease amongst his troops. He preferred to spend his time at his headquarters, cut off from the men. In May 1940, Gamelin's command was made up of 4 operational areas. The most important of these was in the northeast, facing Germany. Gamelin retained direct control of planning and strategy, leaving his frontline commanders in charge of operations and liaisons with each other. It was a desperately flawed command structure, characterized by inefficient coordination and communication. To make matters worse, Gamelin had fallen out with his key commanders. The BEF commander, Lord John Gort, was disturbed by the blatant weakness of the French command structure, but as he was subordinate to Gamelin, he could do little about it. Gamelin had been a staff officer during the First World War, and the strategies of that era still dominated his outlook. He believed that infantry still reigned supreme on the battlefield. He discounted the idea that tanks, on their own, could breach a continuous line of defense. As the lessons of the Polish campaign were pondered, he confidently asserted that his forces could contain and cut off any possible breakthrough by panzers. Gamelin's passive strategy infuriated France's new Prime Minister, Paul Reynaud, who called him a nerveless philosopher. Twice in April, and again on the very eve of the German invasion, he tried to have Gamelin dismissed. However, each time the general's political supporters had stepped in to save him. France's fate would now rest in his hands.